Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Todd Korpi, author of a new book titled AI Goes to Church, Pastoral Wisdom for Artificial Intelligence. Todd and his wife, Tara Korpi, have served in ministry together for nearly 20 years. Together, they lead a ministry that resources and provides strategic consultation to churches and Christian ministries, using their unique blending of missiology and theosemiotics with their years of pastoral experience. Todd serves as missiologist in residence at One Hope and as director of the Digital Mission Consortia at the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. He's assistant professor of Christian leadership at Fuller Theological Seminary and dean of digital ministry programs at Ascent College. With Tara, Todd co-hosts the Mutually Matters podcast in partnership with the Christians for Biblical Equality. His work has been featured in publications such as Outreach Magazine and churchleaders.com, and he has contributed to numerous white papers and book projects. In addition to his new book, Todd is the author of two other books, Your Daughters Shall Prophesy and The Life-Giving Spirit. He's passionate about empowering the local church to live as mobilized missionaries where they work and live. Todd and his family live in the Chicago area, and you can learn more at toddkorpi.com. That's TODDKORPI.com. So Todd, thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on all your work.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you here. So what else would you like people to know about you than I read off there?
Well, I think probably the most important thing that wasn't listed there is that I am both a father of three. My wife and I have three daughters, and which this is our first year with one in high school. So pray for me as we're learning. That's a steep learning curve. But then I'm also a massive Detroit Lions fan. So
Ah,
one of those pushing for another a Super Bowl hopeful run this year.
okay. Well, since I grew up outside of Chicago, I'm, believe it or not, still a Chicago Bears fan, even though I haven't lived in Illinois for, I don't know, 50 years or so. But they're not doing so great. But anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
they'll get there.
yeah. Well, there's always hope,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like the Cubs, right?
right, exactly.
So before we get to your book, could you tell us a little bit about a couple of the organizations that I mentioned, One Hope and the Digital Mission Consortia?
Yeah, so One Hope is actually it's a mission organization that's devoted to helping children and youth engage Scripture around the world. So both in terms of access as well as discipleship. Probably one of the tools that many people would be most familiar with is the Kids Bible app on their phone. It was an initiative that was a partnership between YouVersion and One Hope, and so part of that is looking at how they can kind of creatively engage in that space. And obviously, because the next generation is spends a great deal of time online, we spend a lot of time looking into digital forms of ministry as well. But the consortia, the Digital Mission Consortia, is actually a research collab that is between a few different organizations that kind of lead in digital ministry. So YouVersion, Alpha, Talbot School of Theology, One Hope is a part of that, and it's housed at the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. So the idea being that if we're sharing best practices and pain points and things of that sort and solving that with quality research and then just giving that away for the sake of the kingdom, that kind of a rising tides will raise all boats kind of ordeal. So that's been going on now for about 3 years, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I mean, technology and use of online tools and communication is not going to go away anytime soon. So,
Yeah,
and
definitely not.
and we're all still, I would say, new at it, and I haven't solved a lot of problems. So,
Yeah, maybe solve some, created more,
yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit of this and that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So let's talk about your book. As I mentioned, the title is AI Goes to Church, Pastoral Wisdom for Artificial Intelligence. So how did that book come about?
Yeah, so the obviously, most people kind of are familiar with AI and in the way that we talk about it today because of ChatGPT, which released kind of publicly in 2022 and really brought AI to the forefront of cultural conversation. AI has actually been around for many decades now in various forms. If you've ever, selected a show from your favorite streaming platform under the section, movies we think you'll love or something like that. That was given to you by an AI algorithm. What you see in your social media feed and things of that sort. So it's while it's been around a lot, it's really kind of become a dominant part of conversation and a part of kind of the daily lives of a lot of people and how they directly interact with it. And around the same time, I was invited to lead the research for the Digital Mission Consortia. And so it kind of brought me into this space of digital ministry, and AI has been kind of this consistent companion along the way as we're researching and looking at best practices. And so as we were as kind of I began to immerse myself in this space. I'm not a technologist by training. I'm actually a missiologist, so I kind of work at the intersection of Christianity and culture and how the church can effectively minister to the cultures to which God calls us. But what I began to realize is that a lot of times when we talk about kind of this space of church and tech, we rush towards kind of the hacks, the best practices, the tips and tricks. A lot of tech books that are written for Christians, for pastoral leaders, and things of that sort have a fairly short shelf life because it's, hey, how do you, maximize your use of Facebook? Well, now, my my daughter is not on Facebook, but none of her friends are on Facebook. So it has, the way that things change so fast. I wanted to really kind of understand how do we get some theological grounding, some foundation, and build some practical guidance off of that can serve us beyond just the next 6 months when AI takes another pivot and another turn, but really kind of look at, okay, in light of this phenomenon, which really is going to change large portions of human society, how do we as Christians respond to that with faithfulness, with kind of a missional savvy, but also a connection to the great tradition, to our roots, and the wisdom of those who have gone before us?
Well, so glad to see your book, and given I've got a technology background from years ago myself, it's such an important topic, and I haven't seen much in the way of books written about it yet that talk about the intersection of AI and faith. So, thank you for doing that. Um, uh, in the book, you mentioned that AI tools can equip churches to do ministry today, in cost-effective and time-saving ways. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the practical ways that as we speak now, knowing that that changes, but how AI can help churches today?
Yeah, I think there are really three kind of main areas that are fairly low hanging fruit. It doesn't take a lot of robust knowledge of artificial intelligence. I'm having been a pastor myself, I recognize Sundays come around with an alarming regularity, and so your average pastor doesn't have just weeks to pour into the latest and greatest on AI. But there's three areas that I think are really easy to integrate and fairly simple and low risk. The first is automating routine tasks. So I'm not talking about when we think of AI, we think, oh, it's going to it kind of widen the gulf between people, remove us away from relationships. I'm talking about what Pekka Hieman, the Finnish philosopher, calls automating the boring bits. So things that actually take us away from people-facing ministry. There are applications like Pulpit AI and Sermon Shots that will take your sermon video after the fact and chop it up into social media ready reels, small group guides, questions, and things of that sort that can actually take you away from people facing time. One enormous opportunity is in the area of translation. Translation
Mhm.
into various languages has proven to be a very effective use of artificial intelligence. And it's so thinking through like what are the people groups, the language groups that are within my ministry context that I'm not reaching because of language barriers, and how can we use this resource to be able to cross those barriers? And then there's simple things like graphic design and image generation and things of that sort. I would venture to guess most pastors preparing their slide deck or whatever for a Sunday sermon, if you add up all the time that you would get that you waste just looking for the right image to drop in, that
Yes,
can be
yes.
saved in a relatively short period of time. The second is enhancing communication. So most church leaders don't have a super robust understanding of things like SEO or search engine optimization or no understanding social media algorithms and things of that sort. And AI can actually not only explain that to you, but actually kind of optimize some of that. So the language you put on your website or your blog, you can drop it into that and they'll make recommendations to optimize your SEO so people can find that language better. And then finally, it possesses the opportunity actually to free people, including church leaders, up in their time to create margin so we can spend more time in pastoral care and relationship rather than just administration. There's
Mm.
a caveat there that there's always the temptation to just fill up that margin with more stuff to do, the latest, another, project, another ministry or whatever. But if we're wise, we can actually use some of that margin to do the things that matter, which is ultimately spending time with people.
Cool, cool. Well, those are very practical suggestions. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, so with, many technologies, I've seen them in the early stages utilized pretty effectively to help small organizations. But as everyone jumps on the bandwagon, the small fry kind of get muscled out by larger companies with much larger budgets. So, two examples would be blogging and social media itself. Um, do you think that that kind of phenomenon will happen with AI?
That's a very interesting question because had we had this conversation 6 months ago, I would have said, absolutely it will. You're going to have those because it's so expensive to create things like a large language model, which is what ChatGPT and Claude and all of these other Gemini and others from Google, what they are. It takes millions of dollars and tons of people power. But we're seeing as the technology progresses, the cost to actually create to diminish, and some of the threshold to actually do that be a little bit easier to access. In part because of AI. I'll give you a good example. I don't know anything about coding. I took a coding class in high school for a now defunct language or dead coding language called Visual Basic. It does me no good
Sure.
now.
Yeah, I used
And
to write
so,
in that too.
yeah, yeah. But I have used ChatGPT to help and to generate code so that I can create various applications and stuff. So I think that there's potential for some of that threshold to be lowered. One really good example is with the ministry Glue. Which specializes a lot in kind of the church and tech space. They've recently launched a beta model of a large language model that even a year and a half ago would have been kind of a pipe dream just because of the cost threshold. And so they're looking at what does it mean to develop kind of a kingdom minded large language model that is transparent about the sources that it uses, and that is kind of trained on kind of faithful language that represents kind of the diversity of God's kingdom. And so I say all that to say I think that it actually presents some opportunity in the way social media kind of democratized expression online. That had years ago that was often mediated through the webmaster and things of that sort. Now it's just as easy as pulling out your phone and spouting your opinion, for better or for worse. And I think in some way AI is going to do that for smaller organizations, for ministries, to be able to do things because of the access to create that AI gives that once was only possible for large organizations, churches, and things of that sort.
hmm Well, I mean, with social media, the good news was that, as you said, it democratized, and allowed everyone a voice. The bad news is that everyone in the world and every company in the world is doing the same thing, right? So
Absolutely.
between that and the algorithms that skew things in particular ways, um, it really isn't any better effectively to let your voice be heard other than a very small number of folks. And in order for that voice to be heard, you have to spend a ton of money.
Yep.
So, that's why
And
I was saying the big guys really have monopolized it.
yeah, and I think that there's a lot of potential on that, especially because of how fast the industry is moving and the wheels of government regulation run painfully slow. The EU's been a little bit more aggressive than here in North America in terms of trying to find regulations, but there's even loopholes that I talk about in the book where AI companies are using like the battlefield in Ukraine to kind of circumvent those in the name of trying to help out, but actually creating things that could be used for nefarious purposes elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, there's very, very much potential for that. You think about like kind of I'm a one of the originals on Facebook. I got Facebook in 2005 when it was still you had to have an approved.edu email address and stuff. And that then it very much kind of had this ethos of, it's always free. You post, people see what you post, and that's just about the end of it. And we've seen it kind of slowly merge to what you're or evolve to what you're saying of a little bit more pay to play. I can boost what I'm saying to essentially bribe the algorithm to let people see what I'm
Yeah.
saying and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that there's definitely opportunity for that as well. That to where I think that long term we're going to see both in terms of organizations creating for AI applications and just the everyday user, your ability to understand artificial intelligence to kind of keep up on some of the trends and emerging kind of innovations is going to set me up. I'm thinking in terms of like I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and so birthplace of General Motors. And during my lifetime, I witnessed this tremendous deindustrialization trend. So a lot of my dad's generation, who had gone right from high school to the assembly line, were at 50 or 55 looking for a full-time job and trying to figure out how to pivot their career because of layoffs and whatnot. And I think that for my generation, AI is one of those crucial things to keep up on. As I turn 40 next year, and I'm slowly starting to get set in my ways on things. I have to remain savvy in order to remain competitive in the workforce.
Yeah, well, I won't argue that for a minute. It's accelerating.
Yeah.
So in the book, you mentioned three different categories that IBM uses to classify different levels of AI, which I thought was very helpful. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, so IBM uses the term narrow AI to describe kind of AI today. And that's everything essentially from its inception to now. So when we think about a narrow AI, we're talking about something that can define or execute a very defined task, whether it's a chatbot, a translation service, a recommendation engine like Google, ChatGPT, or whatever. But it's pretty much, you give it its parameters, it executes within those parameters. The next phase is actually something that doesn't exist yet. So this is very hypothetical, but it's often, or IBM calls it general AI or AGI. And that's where artificial intelligence would theoretically learn like a human would learn. So it would be able to transfer knowledge across domains. And a good example I would give of this would be what we see in Star Trek: The Next Generation in Lieutenant Commander Data, who I reference in the book, where he's constantly on this quest to expand his humanity, so to speak. And so you see him learning to, take care of his cat and, play cards and all of this kind of stuff. A general AI theory would be that, your AI, maid that is, designated to do the dishes and do the laundry would also be able to pick up in its spare time, quote unquote, and learn the violin or, to understand campaign finance reform or things of that sort. And then the third phase, which is kind of far out there, kind of theoretical in nature, is often what's called super AI. And if folks listening have ever heard of terms like a singularity event, this is kind of what we're talking about, where super AI is this theoretical future where AI would actually surpass human capability entirely. So it would be not only sentient, it would be aware of its own capabilities, but would also surpass those computing capabilities of the human brain and whatnot. So yeah, that's kind of the three kind of basic categories.
Yeah, yeah. That's the third one's the scary one, right? I mean,
Yeah,
no.
there's still a lot of innovation that has to be done before the robots carry us away and stuff. So
Yeah, yeah, no question. But at the rate of change that we've seen, it can't be ignored. Not that it's clear what we do about it at this point, but
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
so here's a profound and what I believe to be true statement from your book. For Christians, the answer lies not within the technology itself, but as with so many things, our motivation and stewardship of it. So another way that I've thought about that in the past is just like any tool can be used for good or bad. Um, the more powerful the tool, the more good or bad it can do or help someone do.
100%.
How do you see that area?
Yeah, it's very much like, you think of a hammer as a tool. I can use a hammer to build a house. I think about, Jimmy Carter, who spent his post-presidential years, working with Habitat for Humanity and building houses for under-resourced communities and whatnot. Or you can also use it in such a way that has also been used to bludgeon someone over the head with it. And so that's not an indictment or even praise for the hammer itself. It's a matter of the person that wields it. And the same would be said about cars. Same would be said about nuclear power. The internet itself. It could be used to, keep in touch with loved ones who are separated by distances, or it could be used to, rob, unsuspecting people of their retirement accounts because of, some sort of scam or whatever. And so technology is never, it's neutral in the sense that it in and of itself is simply a medium of communication and exchange, but it's always shaped for better or for worse by human motivation and stewardship. So in that way, it kind of amplifies our own intentions and reveals them either toward human flourishing or toward harm. And I think this is one of the crucial aspects of artificial intelligence that we need to really consider, because we didn't consider it too much in the kind of the last big technological iteration, which is often called Web 2.0. That's the advent of social media, mobile technology, and things of that sort. We didn't think to ask what does it mean for our understanding of friendship when I can easily unfriend one of the 3,000 people I'm connected to on social media. We didn't stop to think about what that actually does to us. What does it look, or what does it mean for our own understanding and self-worth when all I see on Instagram are these well filtered, well curated photos that people present of their life. And here I am, in my bathrobe, haven't brushed my teeth yet, kind of situation. That comparison game has a corrosive effect that we're just now kind of starting to wake up to. And so we need to understand artificial intelligence poses that same kind of it poses opportunity to contribute to human flourishing. It also poses the opportunity to exploit humanity, to exploit creation. And so for Christians, really the central question is not what AI can do, how can this make my life more effective or productive or whatever, but instead, how are we stewarding artificial intelligence in a way that honors the dignity of God's creation, that honors the image of God within His human creation, and that it carries us forward in participating in His reconciliatory mission in the world. So I think that kind of it reframes it from just this: how do I kind of life hack myself with these different AI applications, toward how do I see this as part of a bigger picture of my calling to be here on this earth for the sake of God's kingdom?
So that kind of leads us right into the whole regulatory question, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
if it can be used for ill, what do we do about that, right? And how do we prevent that from happening as much as we can? What are your thoughts on the regulatory environment for AI?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some hopeful changes over the last several years. or really over the last year in particular. Like I had mentioned, the European Union, even here in the States, we're starting to kind of ask some questions about AI regulation, specifically within specific sectors like the legal sector, education, healthcare, things of that sort, of how we protect people's information and privacy in this age where we, kind of all seem more than happy to just expend or to give it away. And so there's also this dynamic of when it comes to regulation, we need a better. I think one of the things that is both a blessing and a curse is kind of the competition. We're kind of in this AI race between several leading nations. In the same way in the mid 20th century we were in the space race, trying to get to between us and the USSR, trying to get to the moon. China and the US in particular are kind of at this like back and forth. Who's going to kind of lead the way? I think we need ethicists, we need theologians, we need philosophers, we need anthropologists and sociologists a part of that conversation, not simply technologists. We need technologists too, but we need to kind of have a robust kind of framework of looking at artificial intelligence from a multidisciplinary perspective, rather than just how do we, make sure that we're protecting data. We also need to think about how do we protect human dignity? How do we, prevent things like, the perpetuation of gender and racial stereotypes through responses from large language models and things of that sort. So I think we're moving in that direction. People, there's a lot of not only private sector but government entities that are thinking well about it. But we definitely have a way to go.
I mean, who do you think ought to be convening this? I mean, globally. I mean, is it the government should take the lead, or I can't imagine it being the tech companies.
No, no, definitely not. I think that I think it needs to be multi-pronged. I think government does have a place. I do think that there is space for, and there is, we can often kind of write off, the technology industry as, being kind of money or power hungry because of, the figures that always make the news. But there are people who are a part of that space that are that have a concern for human dignity, that have a concern for kind of old school. Think about like hacker culture in the 90s, which was much more concerned about, open source sharing and free exchange and things of that sort, kind of retaining some of those values. And so I think that I think there is opportunity within the tech space. I know, Google is looking at forming or has formed kind of some ethical governance internally, but I'm cautious of just simply trying to outsource the our understanding of regulation, and the establishment of regulation to large institutions like governments. I think it takes in collectives of different organizations, different companies, cross-sector collaboration. But ultimately, I think there's this tendency that Wendell Berry addresses in an old essay that he wrote years ago, called "Think Little," and he taught. This was in the midst of the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and things of that sort. And in response to those movements, he criticized kind of our tendency as Americans to simply kind of outsource our concern for justice and reform to large organizations and not give consideration for how we individually participate in that process. So, and it creates a dissonance to where I might be, really upset and, be, voting for people that are going to put an end to things like, child labor. But then, I'm still, shopping in my personal shopping habits are leveraging or using those companies that exploit from child labor. And so I think that we need to think through how can I individually, as a person, not simply wait for. I think there is an advocacy piece, but how can I individually look at integrating AI in a way in my life that contributes to the good of my neighborhood, the good of my neighbor, my family, and things of that sort. And so I think there is kind of a self-regulatory component in that whole process that we need to consider as well.
Yeah, that's not the one I'm most worried about, quite frankly, but I don't dismiss what you're saying.
What is it that you're most worried about?
Well, the big guys, the big bad guys.
Yeah,
It's preventing the big bad guys from doing bad things. That's what
yeah,
matters at the end. And I don't think you and I as individuals can fight that or prevent it. We can't, I mean, we get regulated for our own use, but not for ill use at large.
yeah. I think that there's opportunity and precedence for organization to force companies to lean on them to do certain things. But I tend to share a great deal of pessimism about specifically large tech companies that kind of almost exist ahead of the awareness of institutions that have the capacity to regulate them.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have a good answer for how to rein that in apart from no longer using their products. But the reality is much of the world that we live in is shaped by the products that they use
Yeah.
or
And the
that they
bad
put
guys are
forward.
going to use whatever the best product is available, whether, um, it's not available to you or I or not.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a big issue, and there's no easy answer to it. I realize that. So you introduced me to a new term I'd never heard before, ontological designation. Could you explain to folks what that is?
Yeah. So ontology refers to the nature of being. An ontological designation is about naming what something actually is. So when I talk about kind of our ontological designation as human beings, I kind of separate AI in terms of we use a term like artificial intelligence. It implies this degree of intelligence that is inherent to AI that actually doesn't exist. So AI, that intelligent feature, has historically been measured in its contrast or comparison to human intelligence. So AI may mimic intelligence, but in and of itself does not possess it. So it doesn't have personhood, even though it can mimic semblances of personality and relationship and things of that sort. So I talk about in the book how as technology continues to evolve in this space, specifically within two subcategories. The first being kind of relational artificial intelligence, so thinking chatbots, those kind of resources that are often used to mimic human relationship. They can empathize, they can be confidants, and at a very low risk because it's not going to go spill the tea, to somebody else. Then you also have this emerging field that is there's a lot of effort and money and time put into, which is AI powered robotics, getting a kind of humanoid looking robots into everything from your warehouse to your home. To be able to be in those spaces, either to replace human work or to be a complement to it, and so we can see already in this relational space, there's a lot of attachment. People report as they engage chatbots and things of that sort, a great deal of kind of a perception of trust and bonding that takes place. So it's just a matter of time before those two converge. And we see that already in kind of popular level movies of, androids that, mimic human relationship and things of that sort. There's a ton of them that have been out there. And it's going to call into question what is a human. If that bot, if that android looks human and acts human, can reason like a human, is it human? Does it deserve rights? And pastors are going to inevitably be faced with questions about everything from can my AI, home robot be saved to, questions of sexuality and things of that sort. And so it's important for us to have this robust theology of the image of God. Now, when we look at Genesis, we see one that imaging status, that's where I get the term ontological designation of an imager is something that is assigned by God to humanity. It's not something that we have the capacity to take up on our own. And so it's an external designation that every time throughout human history, humans have taken upon themselves the felt right to say what is human and what is not. Tragedy and catastrophe inevitably follows. Some of the worst things that humans have ever inflicted upon one another has been as a result of saying, well, that people group is not human. That people group is subhuman and things of that sort. So this is one of those situations where a Christian conviction, a Christian response should be that to be human is to bear the image of God. To bear the image of God is to be human. And that means that's an externally derived designation that's been given to us. So no matter how sophisticated artificial intelligence may ever be, it fundamentally will not be human.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, hard to argue with that, but it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out, all kinds of practical aspects of it. So one thing that I was glad that you raised in the book is that AI is inherently biased. So could you help folks understand why that's the case and how that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, at kind of a foundational level, AI is biased because AI uses data, and data is
Right.
compiled by humans, and humans have bias, and we never shed our bias. And so that kind of
Yeah.
that chain of custody results in bias as well. And so we kind of almost think sometimes about data as being like this like objective kind of all-encompassing thing. There's kind of this movement within tech called big data, that basically kind of the underlying assumption is if data is biased, we need more data to correct the bias. If we have all the data, eventually we'll reach perfection. And that kind of has this Babel kind of quality to it in terms of, we're going to, eventually we'll achieve kind of this perfection like the Most High. But fundamentally, AI is trained on data that is rife with bias. And so some of that some of that results in, and you see, there's tons of examples in news articles and whatnot of biases and things like recidivism rates disproportionately affecting negatively Black Americans, or in hiring practices. I cite an example in the book of hiring practices within the field of engineering. It's going to look at the ideal candidate based off of who current candidate or who current engineers are, and most engineers fit a very narrow gender and racial kind of demographic. And so they found in those hiring practices, it was just straight up rejecting candidates based solely on those factors because it didn't meet that ideal. In a lot of the image generation resources that are out there, it can perpetuate gender stereotypes and racial stereotypes and things of that sort. And so, and then there's kind of at a more foundational level, all of the data, if we think of kind of data as like kind of water pipes coming into kind of a central location, a central reservoir, the more that an organism, or I'm sorry, more that a people group or part of the world has access to consistent internet, to faster internet. It's like having bigger pipes from those areas. So more water is going to flow into the central reservoir from those locations. Because of that, we actually have the kind of general knowledge that AI feeds off of tends to skew heavily Western, heavily kind of middle class and above. And so it has a tendency to overlook the poor. It has a tendency to overlook under-resourced communities. It has a tendency to overlook the global South. And for Christians, especially looking at the future of Christianity, which is going to be in a very short period of time seated primarily in the sub-Saharan Africa, it has the potential to create a tremendous dissonance between what's actually happening. Christianity is growing gangbusters in the global South, and what we're getting from artificial intelligence and other forms of kind of algorithmic thinking, and that is representation of the West. And so we need to think through, how do we account for that? How do we kind of balance that? How do we engage it ethically and kind of contend for more ethical practices and how in order to produce content, in order to produce resources and perspectives that represent the fullness of our global community.
Well, as I said before, I think your book is very helpful. I mean, and you're raising a ton of, issues that need to be raised and need to be dealt with. What would you say is the one thing you'd like readers to take away from your book?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is to understand that AI is already shaping the church, already shaping your congregation. For church leaders, it's already shaping your life, even if you've never logged on to ChatGPT. It is shaping the world around you, often unnoticed. So the task before us is not to decide if I'm going to use AI in my church. It's a matter of, how am I going to engage faithfully in this conversation? How am I going to contend for faithfulness, for human flourishing and dignity, and as it pertains to this technology? And how am I going to disciple the people that God has brought into my sphere? And that can be a pastor who's in charge of leading his or her church. That can be me as a parent and looking at raising up my family, whatever that looks like. How do we as people groups contend for a robust theology and understanding of how to engage faithfully in artificial intelligence? And I think, secondly, and related to that, is that we need to adopt a posture that is neither overly eager. I definitely don't take that posture in the book of just, let's gobble up all the AI applications that we can. But nor do I think that we need to adopt kind of a Luddite posture of, kind of uncritical rejection either, but instead kind of this cautious optimism that recognizes that there's tremendous missional potential to reach people with the gospel, to tend to communities, to raise up people out of unjust situations and their standard of living. But it also has a lot of potential to have unseen consequences if we don't ask the question, when integrating AI into our lives in a new way, of not simply just asking, well, what is this? How does this stand to benefit me? But asking the question of, what do I stand to lose? That is actually important, that I'm not thinking about. And the example that I use in the book is, again, another Wendell Berry essay from, I think it was 1986, year I was born, and it was entitled "Why I Won't Buy a Computer," and so I was reading it, and within it he talks about how a part of kind of his workflow when he would write his poetry or books would be, he would sit down and have conversations with his wife, and she would look over the paper manuscript, ask him questions, mark up edits, and over the years it became this really harmonious kind of intimacy building exercise between the two of them. And fundamentally, it basically came down to, I'm not going to buy a computer because I don't want to give up this.
Hmm.
And so I think that's a beautiful way to illustrate, like, sometimes when we adopt something or integrate something, we can lose precious parts of what makes us human, that I think we need to kind of account for. So.
Hmm. Hmm. So I know you're in the midst of, just launching a new book, but where do you go from here? Are there other books, other projects that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, so kind of a few in the beginning stages right now, but one, I'm working on kind of a textbook for one of the program that I'm developing or have developed at Ascent College, kind of an introduction to digital ministry. But then I'm also, related to this book, the chapter on theology of work. I'm planning to spin off into a book in and of its own, kind of in the age of technology, of hustle and bustle, and exploitation and things of that sort. How do we construct and kind of live into a theology of work that is more about meaning making than it is about productivity and kind of being on the hamster wheel? So yeah, that's what
Cool.
I'm working on right now.
Good for you. Well, keep us posted. So again, the name of the book is AI Goes to Church, Pastoral Wisdom for Artificial Intelligence. Todd, thanks so much for doing this and for joining us today. Please check out Todd's website, toddkorpi.com.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.